Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Stout, and welcome to Stout Gaming. World of Warcraft is preparing to launch its 9th expansion, Shadowlands, later this year. With every new expansion, there is an influx of new players who will be stepping into Azeroth for the first time. This is the first video in a series for new players to help to simplify the sometimes overwhelming number of choices that the game can present and to guide them through the basics of the world. I will not be going into the specifics of the classes and class changes in Shadowlands, but those videos will come later down the road. In this video, we will be looking at the 12 classes that a player can select. Class selection is one of the most important aspects of the game, as it cannot be changed later at any time. Each class also has 2 to 4 specializations, also known as specs, that it can switch between. Broadly speaking, each spec stays within the theme of the class. For example, a mage has 3 different specs: Fire, which focuses on fire-based spells to burn the enemy; Frost, which primarily uses ice-based magic to freeze and slow enemies; and Arcane, which uses powerful yet unstable raw magic to attack enemies. A mage can freely switch between each of these 3 specs, and I would recommend trying each of them when you are leveling up your class to see what feels best for you. Each spec can also come in one of 3 roles: damage dealers, also known as DPS, who primarily focus on doing as much damage to enemies as they can; healers, who focus on healing the health of themselves and their allies; and tanks, whose primary job is to absorb damage and provide cover for those around them. As a new player, I would recommend playing a DPS spec first, as generally speaking, tanks and healers have more responsibility in group content. For the purposes of this video, we will be lightly touching on the specs, but primarily focus on the class and the roles that it can perform. I will be rating each of these classes on ease of play for new players and how fun they are to play in general. These ratings are entirely my opinion, and if you disagree with them, please let me know in the comment section below. The first class we're going to look at is the Warrior. Warriors have 3 specs. Fury and Arms are melee DPS specs, and Protection is a tank spec. Warriors are physical attackers who use their immense power and rage to overwhelm their opponents. Warriors wear heavy plate armor so they can take a hit better than most other classes. In general, the Warrior playstyle is fairly simple to pick up, and it isn't overly punishing towards mistakes. For this reason, I'm giving Warrior an 8 out of 10 for ease of playability for new players. While the class is simple, that doesn't mean it isn't fun. Warrior's 3 specs all have engaging gameplay on par with many other classes. I'm giving the Warriors 7 out of 10 in the fun department, for an overall score of 15 out of 20. This places Warrior firmly in the A tier, as a class that new players can quickly pick up and enjoy playing. Up next we have the Paladin. Paladins also have 3 specs. Retribution is the only DPS spec, Protection is a tank spec, and Holy is a healing spec. Paladin are one of 3 classes in the games with access to all 3 roles, and as such have the potential for long-term growth and versatility as new players grow more comfortable in the game. Paladins are holy warriors that are empowered by the light, and bring judgment upon their enemies. While a paladin's base abilities are not exceedingly complex, the amount of utility spells that they bring throughout their unique blessings can be overwhelming. Using the wrong blessing at the wrong time could be disastrous in certain scenarios. For these reasons, I'm giving the Paladin a 5 out of 10 for ease of play. With that being said, once you feel like you've mastered the blessing system, Paladins can provide an unparalleled amount of personal and group utility. Combined with their high self-healing potential and the ability to throw a shield like Captain America, I'm giving the Paladin a 7 out of 10 for fun. Their overall score is 12 out of 20, good for a spot in the C tier. While it's not one of my top recommendations for new players, those who enjoy the fantasy of being a holy avenger who want to take on the challenge of mastering the usage of complex utility could find Paladins quite enjoyable. Our next class is the Hunter. Hunters have 3 DPS specs. Beast Mastery and Marksmanship Hunters are ranged DPS, and Survival Hunters are melee DPS. Hunters are a pet class, meaning that they are accompanied by an animal ally. Hunters are able to tame almost any animal on Azeroth to be their pet. Hunters build and spend focus with their abilities. Due to their pet being able to tank for them, Hunters, specifically Beast Mastery Hunters, are one of the easiest classes to play in the game. They have a fairly simple rotation of core abilities, and their pets will protect them from a lot of harm. Hunters score a perfect 10 out of 10 for ease of play. A potential downside of that playstyle is a Hunter's pet can do more than half of their damage. That lack of agency over your own damaging abilities can be off-putting to some. I'm only going to give the Hunters 6 out of 10 for fun, and a final score of 16 out of 20. This places Hunters in the S tier for new players, largely on the basis of their ease of play. The Rogue also has 3 DPS specs. Outlaw, Assassination, and Subtlety are all melee DPS. Rogues are a stealthy class that always has a trick up their sleeves to help them out in a pinch. All rogues have two different resources: energy, which you spend on many abilities and passively regenerates throughout the fight, and combo points that you gain by using certain builder attacks and spend on finishers. Rogues have the ability to use the shadows to sneak past enemies and launch surprise attacks on unsuspecting foes. The ability to slip in and out of stealth provides rogues with a bit of a failsafe for newer players. While many of their mechanics are not the most simple, having the ability to vanish as a get-out-of-jail-free mechanic leads me to give rogues an ease of playing score of 7 out of 10 points. The various playstyles, stealth shenanigans, and swashbuckling class fantasy cause rogues to be one of the more enjoyable classes to play. As such, I'm giving rogues 8 out of 10 points in the fun category. With a total score of 15 out of 20 points, rogues are solidly in the A tier, and a great place to start for anyone who likes the concept of sneaking around undetected and attacking with quick melee attacks. Up next we have the Priest. Priests have 2 healing specs, Discipline and Holy, and 1 DPS spec, Shadow. Priests are the only class in the game with 2 healing specs, and as such are a good place to start if you're interested in healing. Priests are devout followers of either the Light in Holy's case or the Void in Shadow's case. Discipline priests harness both the Light and the Void in balance with one another. Judging how easy it is to pick up a priest is difficult. Holy priests are what people visualize as a healer. They see an ally with low health, and they cast a spell to heal them. Discipline, on the other hand, is much more complex healer that requires you to preemptively predict when someone is going to take damage, and Shadow is one of the more complex DPS specs in the game, forcing you to balance your attacks while building and maintaining insanity. Overall, I will give Priests a 7 out of 10 for ease of play. For fun, I'll give Priests a 6 out of 10. Discipline is one of the most fun specs to play in the game, but Holy and Shadow drag the class down as a whole, and Discipline is not an easy spec to play as a newer player. Priests score an overall 13 out of 20 for a solid placement in the B tier. I'll be adding the caveat that if you know you want to be a healer, Priests jump up in the rankings, as learning 2 healing specs can be invaluable. Shamans have 1 melee DPS spec, Enhancement, 1 ranged DPS spec, Elemental, and 1 healer spec, Restoration. Shamans are able to commune with and control the 4 elements, fire, earth, water, and air, harnessing their abilities to harm their foes or be a boon to their allies. Shamans are one of the most complicated classes in WoW. You need to balance various cooldowns, maintain dot effect, and properly use a unique set of utility totems. While no class in WoW is impossibly difficult, Shamans tie for the lowest score in ease of playability with a 4 out of 10. Shamans more than make up for that in the fun department. If Paladins can channel Captain America, then Shamans can be Thor. The visual effect of Chain Lightning and how fun it feels to cast, combined with the engaging playstyle that lets you operate as a hybrid role, healing allies while in DPS when necessary, and doing solid damage as a healer. In my estimation, Shamans are the most fun class to play on the strength of Elemental and Restoration. Enhancement lags a little behind currently, but has changes coming in Shadowlands that look like an improvement. Overall, I give Shamans my only perfect 10 out of 10 for fun, for an overall score of 14 out of 20, and solid placement in the B tier. If you're experienced with other MMO games, or want a challenge, then Shamans have the possibility of being the single most rewarding class to play in World of Warcraft. Mages have 3 ranged DPS specs, the previously mentioned Fire, Frost, and Arcane. Mages are the archetypical wizard-style spec. They are a glass cannon with high potential damage output in all 3 specs. The biggest issue for mages in solo content is their incredibly low survivability. They struggle for defensive options, and often have to cleanly execute their damaging rotation to kill an enemy before it kills them. For that reason, I'm giving mages a 6 out of 10 for ease of play. It isn't inherently difficult, but it's much more difficult to recover from mistakes. For fun, mages get a solid 7 out of 10 for an overall score of 13 out of 20, and solid positioning in the B tier. Mages can be the right choice for new players who want to use a ranged caster playstyle, but they will need to overcome low survivability that the class inherently has. The last class with 3 DPS specs is the Warlock. Destruction, Affliction, and Demonology are all ranged DPS specs. Warlocks harness the power of demons from the Twisting Nether by absorbing and repurposing the souls of their enemies. Warlocks are also a pet class that can summon a variety of demons to fight alongside them. Unlike hunters, warlocks require more pet management, as different demons have different abilities. To have a demon that functions as a tank, you will have to sacrifice your potential damage, and vice versa. On top of that, the damage profile of a warlock is not as conducive to single-player encounters, but is much better in group content. With all that being said, I'm going to give warlocks a 4 out of 10 for ease of play for new players. Summoning and controlling demons leads to some fun play scenarios, but a few key Warlock abilities often feel underwhelming, and Affliction spec in particular is all about maintaining dot effects. Overall, I'll give Warlocks a 7 out of 10 for fun, and a final score of 11 out of 20, good for a spot in the C tier. Warlocks can be a good class choice, specifically for those who enjoy the class fantasy of controlling demons, but it would not be my first recommendation for new players. Monks are a newer class, first introduced in the Mists of Pandaria expansion in 2012. They have 3 specs: Windwalker, a melee DPS, Mistweaver, a healing spec, and the tank spec, Brewmaster. Monks are martial artists who are able to perform amazing feats after years of training. Monks have many abilities to increase their mobility and provide utility to their allies. However, they also have a fairly complicated set of attacking abilities, and Windwalkers are punished if they repeat the same attack twice, while also having to manage a builder-spender playstyle with chi points and cooldowns of various lengths. While Brewmaster is one of the least punishing tanks for mistakes by new players, Mistweaver offers a complex healing toolkit that takes a good understanding of the game to pull off. Overall, I'm giving Monks a 5 out of 10 for new player playability. I'm also giving Monks 7 out of a possible 10 points for fun, as the class does have some fun moments and can be quite rewarding after mastery. Overall, Monks score 12 out of a possible 20 points and are placed in the C tier. While Monks do have some issues in solo play, their flowing playstyle can appeal to those who enjoy the martial arts fantasy. I personally mained a monk during Battle for Azeroth. Druids are unique, as they are the only class with 4 specs. Guardian is a tank, Restoration is a healer, Feral is a melee DPS, and Balance is a ranged DPS. Druids are completely in tune with nature, and as such are able to transform into avatars of nature depending on their spec and race. Guardians can become bears, Feral Druids can become tigers, Restoration Druids can become trees, and Balanced Druids can become flightless man-chicken things called moonkins. Druids can also swap between forms in any spec, but the forms are much less effective outside of their intended spec. As a whole, Druids run the gamut in difficulty. Guardian Druids are perhaps the easiest tank to play in the game, and is such a good starting point for anyone looking to grow their skills in that direction, whereas Feral Druids feel like trying to balance spinning plates. Overall, I'm going to give Druids a 6 for ease of play. Because while there are some styles that are easy, the amount of choice and form swapping resulting from that choice can be overwhelming. Druid is a difficult spec to analyze on a fun level. Each spec has some entertaining group utility, but the enjoyment of executing each spec's damaging abilities varies drastically. Overall, I'll just give them a 7 out of 10 for fun, but for everyone watching, that score could be much higher or lower depending on your appreciation for the class and class fantasy in general. Druids are always going to be a solid choice for anyone who wants a lot of choice and the ability to experience every game's playstyle, and as such, I'm placing them in the B tier. The newest class in World of Warcraft is the Demon Hunter, which was introduced in 2016 with the Legion expansion. Demon Hunters only have 2 specs, Havoc, a melee DPS spec, and Vengeance, a tank spec. For the remainder of BFA, Demon Hunters can only be created once you have a level 70 character, and they start at level 98. Once Shadowlands launches, that restriction will be removed, and so will the higher starting level. Demon Hunters use demonic magic against the demons who wield them, and as such have certain traits of demons. This class is fairly simple to play and has high passive survivability. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 for ease of play for new players, second only to Hunters. Demon Hunter abilities are designed to be flashy, and the wings of Demon Hunters all have allow them to glide as well. Demon Hunters will score an 8 out of 10 points for fun, giving them an overall score of 16 out of 20 and a spot in the S tier. Assuming the removal of restrictions in Shadowlands continues as planned, Demon Hunters will be a great class for many new players, especially those who want a fast-paced, visually impressive character. The last class to talk about is the Death Knight. Death Knights have 1 tank spec, Blood, and 2 DPS specs, Unholy and Frost. Originally introduced in Wrath of the Lich King, Death Knights are elite undead soldiers who've pledged themselves to fight on behalf of the living. Until the end of BFA, Death Knights will start at level 58, but are available for all players to play. Death Knight abilities grow on top of one another, and require a balancing of 2 separate resources. As such, Death Knights only receive a 4 out of 10 for ease of play for newer players. Once a Death Knight is mastered, it is rewarding. Summoning undead armies, draining life from enemies, and walking on water are just a few of the abilities that become available to Death Knights. I'm going to give them an 8 out of 10 in the fun score. Overall, Death Knights receive 12 out of 20 points for a spot in the C tier. Ambitious players who enjoy playing a class that feels like slow-moving, inevitable death may still enjoy Death Knight, but it's not my first choice for players that are new to MMOs. And that wraps up all of the classes in World of Warcraft. To quickly recap, my tiered recommendations for new players would be S tier, Demon Hunter and Hunter; A tier, Warrior and Rogue; B tier, Priest, Shaman, Mage, and Druid; C tier, Paladin, Warlock, Monk, and Death Knight. I want to clarify that there are no bad classes or wrong choices. No class scored lower than 4 for ease of play or 6 for fun. If one sticks out to you that I have in the C tier, by all means play it. The main purpose of the game is to have fun, and no ratings video should dissuade you from doing that. My main purpose was to provide basic information and analysis on the classes as I view them for new players. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you enjoyed the content, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. If you have any disagreements with me, feel free to comment below, and I will respond to as many of them as I can. Once again, my name is Stout, and this is Stout Gaming.